Mrs. D'Souza, ladies and gentlemen. Uh, this evening has been organized by my friend Dilip, who received all of you at the entrance. I extend a very warm welcome to all of you on behalf of Nehru Center. This is a memorial lecture in memory of a very distinguished civil servant. A civil servant of a totally new breed. The earlier breed was the ICS, the Indian Civil Service. But in 1946, the Secretary of State for India informed the Government of India that there shall be no further recruitment to the ICS and the IP. The first man to grasp the significance of this statement was Sardar Patel. He realized that independence was coming soon, partition was on the cards, and he calculated that all the British members of the ICS will go back to England. Most of the Muslim members of the ICS will opt for Pakistan, and there will be a huge vacuum created. So he conceived the idea of All India services. And the two All India services he thought of was the Indian Administrative Service and the Indian Police Service. These two services actually were the people who inherited the responsibility of running this country. A country which came into existence in utter chaos and violence. It's a long story, but I'll only bring to your notice what Sardar Patel, in his address to the first batch of the Indian Administrative Service, said. And if I remember his words correctly, he said, "A civil servant cannot afford to and must not get involved in politics, and certainly not in communal wranglings. A departure from the path of rectitude would be debasing the public service and lowering its dignity." Mr. JBD'Souza perhaps imbibed those words in letter and spirit, and lived by these norms all through his career. A man who upheld the principle of the rule of law as best as anyone could have, a principle which is based on freedom and justice. So it is a privilege, at least it is my privilege, to have known him, to have worked with him for a short while, but it was a wonderful experience. So I thank Dilip for organizing a memorial lecture for him, and you have a wonderful speaker for the evening. Thank you.
Good evening, all of you. Welcome to the fourth JBD'Souza Memorial Lecture. I'm Dilip. I'm JB's second son, and I think I speak for my family in saying that we're so glad to see all of you here today to remember JB, or as most of us and many of you knew him, Bain. So we're really glad that all of you are here. And I say that particularly because I remember a story that he used to tell us as kids. It's a scene from a movie involving a man called Eddie Cantor. And he used to tell us that apparently there was some hefty thug who used to, who in this particular scene was chasing after Eddie Cantor and going through a maze of corridors and finally cornered Eddie Cantor in a room, in a small room. And he stood over Eddie. And here you've got to imagine my father saying this. He stood over Eddie like that and he said, "Are you alone?" with pointing his gun. And then my father would turn around and he'd say, "No, you are with me." So Bain loved that story. And so today I'd like to tell him, you are not alone, we are with you. Or maybe we are not alone, you are with us. It really is an honor to have my old and very good friend Smruti Koppikar here to deliver this lecture. Smruti and I first met at one or the other of a number of marches and demonstrations in 1993. To me, even then, that said something about the kind of spirit that she brings to her journalism. And in the years since, she's built up a really impressive resume of jobs held and work done. And she calls herself an urban chronicler. And that also says a lot. She is forever interested in and concerned about, engaged with urban issues, in particular this city's issues. And I think that, in fact, is the foundation of the lasting bond that she had with my father. I was going to paraphrase actually some of Smruti's accomplishments for you, but then I thought I could do that best by quoting a friend who could not be here today. He sent me a message saying, "Smruti is a terrific choice. She's a formidable journalist who has always put integrity above all else." So he's absolutely right, and I'm so glad that we have Smruti with us. Please join me in welcoming Smruti Koppikar to speak to us today.
Good evening, friends, family, and fellow travelers. We're meeting in JB's memory, and thank you to the family of JB, Ravi, Dilip, Vibha, Ramni, and most of all, Neela Auntie, and Surabhi and Sahir. I know you. We were discussing what to speak and how to evolve this, and Dilip left it to me. And I thought we should speak about something that's all around us, the elephant in the room, really, propaganda. We've all been dealing with it. And I have a few ideas, and let's see where the next 45, 50 minutes takes us. So what I have done is to work out some thoughts on building solidarities, battling propaganda. But I'm going to start with the propaganda part. I consider this an extreme privilege and honor to be speaking in the memory of JB. I haven't met a civil servant like him. But I must begin with an anecdote that told me so much about JB, as I called him. I was a young reporter, second year in journalism in Bombay. It was Bombay then, when liberalization was brought in. Among other things in the city, the top story was the de-reservation of vast tracts of land in Vasai Virar. Some 585 plots de-reserved in one go. Some of you might remember that. My editor then asked me to interview JB, not even 2 years into the profession. And so one hot afternoon, I landed at his and Neela Auntie's Bandra home. It meant for me commuting from Borivali to my newspaper office in South Bombay to Bandra, then back to the office because there were no mobiles and systems then, before trundling home to Borivali. When I sat in their drawing room, taking in everything that JB was trying to explain about land loss, de-reservation, and why it was a scam, I think Neela Auntie took in other aspects of me. At the end, she very briskly directed JB and me to the dining table, pushed me to have a snack and tea, and told me in a very motherly voice, You're as old or as young as my son. I can see what your people need. Thank you for that, Neelanti. If this was quiet grace, there was more that evening. In the 3 hours I spent with JB, he, the former Municipal Commissioner of Mumbai, the former Chief Secretary of the Government of Maharashtra, did not once let on that he was educating me, a rookie reporter, in the complexities of land governance in Bombay. How could I interview him? But he let me do that. That is grace. Another lesson learned. But allow me to tell you this evening of JB's act of defiance, of courage, steadfast belief in upholding the law, as Sahani sir said a while back, that I saw very soon after. It is the one that I draw a link to today's topic about battling propaganda. Many of you in the room are old enough to remember how Bombay burned in December 92 and Jan 93. And you would recall that one newspaper, a highly popular Marathi newspaper edited by a demagogue, stopped being a newspaper and turned into a propaganda sheet. Among the headlines and stories it had were, and I quote, "There are many Pakistans in Mumbai, blast them. No justice for Hindus. Fanatic traitors go scot-free, while terrorist Khan," who was, by the way, an IPS officer, A. Khan, fires at Hindus, and so on. The logical step should have been for the police to file FIRs, charge journalists and the editor, with sections 153A and B of the Indian Penal Code for provoking sentiments and all of that. The Mumbai police, of course, did not do that. The Congress government did not instruct the police, because who would dare to touch the late Mr. Bal Thackeray, the editor? I got a call from JB a few days later. And he said, "Please come and meet me. Can you help me with something?" When JB called, you went. You didn't ask questions. So I landed at their home. I realized later where it led. He and Dilip Thakur, the journalist, approached the Bombay High Court demanding appropriate action against Mr. Thackeray, two men in this city who stood up to believe what they thought was right. What did I do in that? A very footnote-ish role. They needed translations of all that had appeared in Samna, the headlines and the stories, and I was in a small group of translators, and those translations then became part of the case papers. JB and Dilip Thakur had dared to take on the loudest, lethal propagandist of their time in our city. You will agree with me that in the 32 years since, the scale, the nature, the kinds of propaganda have substantially expanded, despite or because of the growth in the media. We have tons more of it now, freely floating, often unchallenged. Frankly, I think we are all quite tired of challenging it. And you'll agree with me that most of the news media, certainly not all, have turned more propagandist in the past decade than anything we had seen back in 92, 93. I speak today on propaganda, but not only in the media. Why? Because propaganda subtly influences how people perceive facts and events by selectively presenting information, mixing truths and falsehoods, using loaded language. It creates and reinforces biases and prejudices. It shapes public opinion on complex issues by framing them in a particular way, making it difficult for people to see alternative perspectives. Noam Chomsky, he doesn't need an introduction in this room. Chomsky wrote in his book, The Spectacular Achievements of Propaganda, and I quote, "Propaganda is to a democracy what the bludgeon is to a totalitarian state." What a line. We must frame it, paint our walls with it. Propaganda is to a democracy what the bludgeon is to a totalitarian state. Who indulges in propaganda? Those in power or those who aspire to power? Propaganda and power, I'm sure you know, are joined at the hip. Propaganda helps power, allows it to shape public discourse and the popular narrative. And as Hannah Arendt, the essayist who decoded so much about fascism, told us, before mass leaders seize power, their propaganda is marked by its extreme contempt for facts. In their opinion, fact depends entirely on the power of the man who can fabricate it. And so propaganda is sinister, it's dangerous, and most of all, the profession that I come from, journalism, it takes away from truth. And if we take truth away, we have very little left in our democracy. And so I have 5 points to offer you about propaganda, and I'll go through them with a few examples. First, propaganda has been normalized in the past decade or so. It was a part of our lives. It's not that it suddenly came up in 2014 or 15, but it's now become normal, and it shouldn't. As we watched our immediate worlds turn propagandist, people we worked with, cousins, uncles we grew up with, friends we thought we knew well, people in our neighborhoods, cycling friends, sabziwalas, fruitwalas, housing societies, you name it. Literally everybody has bought into propaganda, and I don't need to say what kind of propaganda. For me, because I also teach classrooms and campuses, fellow academics have turned ever so softly majoritarian. As we watched, propaganda has become completely and thoroughly normalized around us. We must first recognize this normalization so that we can begin to battle it. Propaganda has so corrupted our entire system in such a large measure that many good people with critical thinking minds have begun to believe that this is normal. Let's get on with life. Okay. It is not. It should not be normal. Both the propaganda and the perception of its normalcy have to be battled. That's point one. Point two, propaganda takes us away from truth, and this matters. How often have we heard this question? What development happened in the last 60 years? This is not just a political question, it has a lot of propaganda behind it. Ironically, this question has been asked, repeated, and parroted even by those people whose lived experience covers those decades. Okay? But just for perspective, let's recall India's literacy rate was barely 12% at independence. 12%. By 2014, when a certain kind of propagandists tell us that we got our independence, it was 70%. In 1947, India's average life expectancy was only 32 years. By 2014, it had become 72 years. Propagandists of this sort tell us there was nothing worse in this country than the emergency of 1975. Propagandists of another kind will tell us that today's undeclared emergency is the darkest ever. But why go back all that way? Let's just go back 2 months, a month actually. We witnessed half-truths and falsehoods about the conflict or war between India and Pakistan in early May. The Indian government claims to have won. Pakistanis claim to have won it too. Only one side can be telling the truth, but both sides are very heavily into propaganda. In other contexts, at other times, you will remember that we've been dished out a very heady mix of untruths, a mix of untruths, lies, truths, whatever, such as demonetization will eliminate black money. Or now, Dharavi redevelopment will benefit Mumbai. Those are propaganda statements. I turn here to the feminist scholar Judith Butler, who said in a recent interview about President Trump, which I think holds true for his friend here too. She said, and I quote, "Trump speaks so many falsehoods. We have to ask ourselves, why is it that people are ready to believe these falsehoods, this propaganda? My theory is that they know he's lying, they know he's exaggerating, they know that nothing grounds many of his claims, but they are thrilled that he is able to say all these lies, all of this, and make it seem true. It is that right-wing thrill that wants to be free to hate, most of all, that wants to be free to be irrational. And the irony is that they treat it as some form of liberation. And so each time a propaganda statement takes us away from truth, we lose as a society, as a country. Number 3, propaganda leaves us shocked, confused, and often silenced. We remember the night the demonetization was announced. News reports tell us that more than 100 people died later, waiting in queues for their money or unable to get hospitalized. We had to go through many of us here had to go through the ignominy of not being able to pay small amounts, withdraw our own money from bank accounts, and so on. In different ways, in different degrees, almost all Indians suffered. The propagandists told us we had sacrificed. That's the power of propaganda. Presenting suffering as sacrifice. Very effective. That's what it does. It confuses us. It makes us doubt ourselves, our judgments, our conclusions. It is intended to shape our worldview, the popular narrative of what's happening. Once the ruling regime did not acknowledge people's suffering and instead called it sacrifice, it was then parroted endlessly by its minions, including in the media and the social media. Flooded with this, many of us would have hesitated to say we suffered. If you don't agree with the propaganda, at some point you are likely to fall silent. That, my friends, is the intention. See the international narrative on Israel bombing Gaza for 18 months now, which international aid agencies tell us has killed more than 53,000 people and dishoused lakhs more. Bombs being dropped, targeted shelling of homes and hospitals, intentional starving of an entire population, turning that entire Gaza Strip into one large concentration camp. As we understand language and history, this is called genocide. And yet, there is a debate in the media and in the political world and on campuses about the very use of that word and that term, including by very widely recognized and respected publications of news publications and the media. The more that Israel and its friends' propaganda tells us it is not genocide, and to even suggest this becomes anti-Zionism, many people are shamed into silence. The biggest media now don't use the word. Social media deletes accounts or shadow bans people who use that word. And we are forced to replace the I in genocide with, ironically, an exclamation mark upturned. Okay. Number 4, propaganda touches polycrisis in our society. We now don't have one crisis. We have many crises happening all at once and on many different fronts. Okay? And so suddenly we have many battles to fight together. We are told that tearing down hills and cutting thousands of trees to put more roads and buildings is a good thing. That rivers can be bent at will. All types of wetlands can be landfilled and reclaimed to do what? Put more buildings and highways. We are told that economics versus environment is the only way to see it. That's the longest serving propaganda, probably from the time of my grandparents. We are told that cities have been and are inherently unequal, and that's how it will always be. We've become so used to this statement that we do not any longer recognize the propaganda in that statement. We are told it is okay to not grow food on farmlands, but to accumulate them and hand them over to private capital is fine. To do what? Build more airports, ports, buildings, private cities. We are told it is not okay to waive farm loans because how can the economy take that burden? But it is completely okay to write off corporate loans. As I said, point number one, this has become such a normalized statement that we've even stopped seeing the propaganda behind this in the papers and outside. We are told that farmers are stupid if they take their own lives because their produce does not even bring them a living wage. We are told that developments in AI are now inevitable even if they threaten and challenge the human world. This is complete propaganda. Why is it inevitable? How often do we stop and ask this question? This kind of propaganda at work is result oriented and it's often successful. It presents the world in binaries. It's no longer just about the media, it is about every aspect of our lives. For each of the propaganda statements that I just listed, there are factual assertions, counter arguments, denials based on academic work, explainers, and so on, but it doesn't matter. When there is a flood of propaganda, facts by themselves do not make a difference. This is our lived experience of the past few years. And this has been proved also. Because propaganda speaks to people's emotions, specifically the negative emotions of hate, fear, anger. It doesn't speak to rational selves. And therefore, it becomes a very easy tool to fragment communities and divide people. Every entity in power, political, economic, and social, or the power elite, as Chomsky called them, in capitalist democracies, wants us to believe in such propagandist statements. They want us to buy into each of these without questioning, without thinking for ourselves. That's why we find suddenly that there are too many fronts for us to battle on. It's flooding our spaces. Where do we even begin? Point 5. Propaganda paralyzes us, makes us incapable of questioning or criticizing power. That's the idea. That's its purpose. That's the end game. This is not the work of a few mavericks sitting in some garages. If you feel heavy, dispirited, like I do often, then pause and know that there is $1 trillion propaganda machinery at work. It's an industry. Don't forget that 5 years ago we were turned into a nation of zombies with the propaganda. We were told to bang thalis and clap and sing, "Go Corona, go," to drive away the COVID virus. Those of us who did not participate in this silly spectacle were othered and ostracized. And we wondered why those who did all of these silly things did them. But propaganda is designed to make people numb, to blunt our critical thinking, to make us exhausted, immobile, render us unwilling to engage with rationale, with any kind of factual truths. Once it dominates, we have fewer and fewer shared truths about our world, about the country, about the economy, the environment, cities, culture, everything. Why does this matter in democracies? Because historians like the Yale professor Timothy Snyder, who, by the way, recently quit Trump land to move to Canada to be safe, Timothy Snyder says, when we lose shared truths and understandings about ourselves and the world, we lose the capacity to engage with our democracies and with those in power. This is the intended effect. Let propaganda overwhelm the masses, even the most committed amongst us. Let it shock and confuse people. Let it paralyze and disconnect people from one another, from our social circles, from the environment, from nature, from everything. The point of modern propaganda is not only to misinform, and I believe that those of us who've tried to counter propaganda with fact checks have been at the level of dealing with the misinformation. But the point of modern propaganda is not merely to misinform, it is to exhaust, as Snyder and others have said. It is to exhaust our critical thinking and to annihilate truth. And so these are the 5 points which I feel need to be remembered and revoked, and why propaganda needs to be battled at every level, in families, in drawing rooms, in schools, colleges, housing societies, walking tracks, cycling tracks, gyms, offices, restaurants, history books, most important, media, public discourse, everywhere. There is a price to pay, which is why solidarities become crucial. And I turn to the first half of today's title, Building Solidarities. Of course, battling propaganda can be a solitary act, sometimes of great courage. But I say, from some experience of watching, observing, participating, it is a lot more effective and more resilient when it is a collective act, when we have built solidarities in plural, across the aisle, as it were, across themes and topics, across groups, even with people with whom we might have differences, across languages, geographies. Building solidarities, I propose to you, is one way to begin to unscramble the propaganda, to begin to unscramble it. I would like to say a few words about solitary actions before coming to solidarities. Individually, many of us have been taking initiatives and steps, doing what we could. For myself, like I said, fact checks have been a large part of my toolkit till I realized that, there's an ocean of propaganda out there, and I'm going with a bucket of fact checks, and it's not going to help, right? And so, but that's the tool I have, and that's the tool I will use. That and grabbing every opportunity to speak to a room full of people who will listen to me. The consequence is that I have been, like some of you here perhaps, been thrown out of rooms, thrown out of WhatsApp groups, or we have left them in complete disgust at the very large buffet of lies and untruths that are getting happily consumed. Many of us have chosen individual paths, for whatever reason, to resist this and to battle. Individuals have gone to courts, organized marches, demonstrations, written in the media that's still open. Many of us individually support independent media with subscriptions, sharing, grants. We know people who regularly, silently donate to organizations that resist propaganda, power, and creeping authoritarianism. We know satirists who have shown individual courage to question power when the media has been found wanting. But, I say this with some thought, but in solitary actions, there's always the danger of more easily lapsing into the spiral of silence. To use a very eloquent term that sociologist Elizabeth Noel Newman gave us, she's one of my most favorite persons to read. The spiral of silence. Simply put, her theory says that individuals are less likely to express their true opinions or to take on untrue opinions if they perceive that they are in small numbers because they fear social isolation or retribution. I think I'm alone, so I remain silent. Each of us thinks you're alone, so you remain silent. We're all silent. We believe there is no alternative to what we are hearing because we have gone into that spiral of the society has moved into a spiral of silence. We no longer, for example, even mention the word secularism anymore. The word secularism has been silenced from our public discourse. Did you realize that? We haven't heard it for how many years now, how many months on debates, right? And so words, thoughts, opinions lapse into what Elizabeth Newman says, the spiral of silence. And I quote her, This silence then reinforces the majority viewpoint, creating a self perpetuating cycle where minority voices, divergent voices, dissent are effectively erased. Unquote. So, individually, we fall silent, we monitor ourselves, we become cautious, we self censor, some of us possibly even withdraw. Individual actions, therefore, while admirable, fall short in the kind of polycrisis that we are in. It's not good enough to say, like the stand up comedian Kunal Kamra did in a recent interview, I'm okay without solidarity, unquote. I'm not aware what made him say this, but we should not be okay without solidarities in this kind of a society. We need solidarities of different kinds. We need to break the silos and echo chambers that have been created even amongst ourselves, perhaps unwittingly, over the past few years. Why? Because we live in society. We need each other. In this battle, more than ever, we need each other. And here I recall the words of Albert Einstein, the physicist. What's he doing in this lecture? Okay. Well, Einstein wrote on socialism too. In the journal, the monthly review, he wrote, and I quote, man, okay, dicey, but man is at one and the same time a solitary being and a social being. The individual is able to think, feel, strive, and work by himself in his physical, intellectual, and emotional existence. But it is impossible to think of him or to understand him outside the framework of society. He writes about solidarity in the context of socialism all those many years back. So, how and where do we build these solidarities? I offer three ideas here. One, the solidarity economy. Yeah, there is something called the solidarity economy. Some of you may already be aware of this. What we are now living in is past the capitalist economy stage, say many experts. We are in an attention economy. The social media have given us a loneliness economy. These are all real words, by the way. And AI is set to increase this loneliness, isolation, individualization, and cause more hyper individualization. Just in the last few months, AI has been used not for information, but by people to talk to in their moments of loneliness. Okay. We are heading into, as the economist and former Greek minister Yanis Varoufakis termed it, we are heading into the age of techno-feudalism. If, like Einstein, we believe that the economic anarchy as it exists today, is the real source of evil in quotes, this is Einstein saying, then it all seems very hopeless, right? Till we realize that other kinds of economies are possible. And that is where the work has to start. Solidarity economy is one alternative. It's an alternative model that prioritizes cooperation, social equity, and environmental sustainability over profits and competition. It talks of shared prosperity and empowered communities. At its core, it is a framework aimed at building an economy rooted in human and environmental values for inclusive and just communities. It's a framework, it's out there, it's happening. But it's also a movement. In practice, the solidarity economy principles encompasses more sharing and caring when it comes to land, food, labor, housing, energy, finance, art, and the media. It includes initiatives like worker cooperatives, fair trade, community owned businesses, neighborhood relations, ethical finance, all of which will have people in some decision making capacities or roles. While traditional capitalism focuses on maximizing shareholder value, the solidarity economy stresses value for all stakeholders, not shareholders, stakeholders, employees, communities, and the environment. This, as I said, is a movement and it has to be built, but it is possible. Some of us may not be around to see it come to fruition, but that should not keep us from imagining it, discussing it, proposing it, trying to build it. Second kind of solidarity is solidarity with nature. David Suzuki, again, doesn't need an introduction here. David Suzuki said, economics is not a science. Economists try to fool us into believing that with equations and arrows going all over, but it is not a real science, it is a set of values. Where in this equation will they put the forests and the ozone layer, the deep underground aquifers, the topsoil, the birds and the bees? Nature performs all kinds of services which economists call externalities. That is simply nuts. Conventional economics is a form of brain damage because money doesn't stand for everything, unquote. Solidarity with the environment is something we must absolutely talk more about and actively work towards. Trees speak, they have their own forms of communication. Water has its rhythms everywhere. Seasons are very deeply tied to natural cycles. And human beings are a part of this great complex web of life. That human beings and human society are not separate from nature is something that should have been obvious. But if it needs to be spoken, then we have to speak that. If something hurts human beings, it's bound to hurt nature, and the other way around too. This means we must critically think through the propaganda about economy versus ecology. It is not a binary, it never was. So what can we do? There is an idea, a concept of social ecology. It is a real discipline. It offers a framework for understanding how social and ecological issues are interconnected, how we must develop solutions that address both aspects simultaneously. The Institute of Social Ecology, they are on the internet, you can go and look them up. The Institute of Social Ecology says, and I quote, "This is a coherent, radical critique of the current social, political, and anti-ecological trends. It envisions a moral economy. It envisions a world that reharmonizes human communities with the natural world, while celebrating diversity, creativity, and freedom," unquote. Can we plan and build cities in keeping with these principles? Can we keep knocking on the doors of bureaucrats to slip one poster about this beneath their doors? Maybe teach all this to children in schools. Take them to nature and build solidarity with people about nature. This means that people of South Mumbai should care about RA. RA need not have been saved. RA's trees, 2,200 of them, need not have been saved by activists in the suburbs. People of South Mumbai should have cared more about RA. And those of us in the suburbs, we should worry a lot more about the coastal forest. Okay. So the third solidarity is solidarity circles. The term may be sort of new, but the idea would be familiar to many of you here. I remember circles like this when I was in college, that's many years ago. A solidarity circle is an informal gathering organized by thinkers, grassroots people, activists, academics, homemakers, children, whoever, that brings a cross section of people together with the goal of collective engagement and care. The purpose of a solidarity circle is to facilitate healing from the propaganda and its impacts, from the impacts and vulnerabilities that have come with the excesses of consumerist capitalism. To create safe spaces, one of its purposes is to create safe spaces to reconnect with one another and reimagine our society, our world. Why? To develop a collective voice. It is intentionally, purposefully inclusive. It works at the intersections of many things. And so solidarity circles have been used. They've probably silent, but they've been used. In the US, Methodist churches and religious groups have used solidarity circles for a long time to drive home their message. I hear that activist groups have tapped into solidarity circles or something like that in the past few months in the US. And some of that energy lay behind those 50 protests in 50 states in one day that we saw in the US in April. It didn't happen out of the blue. It didn't happen because of WhatsApp groups. It happened because of real work in rooms, of building these solidarities and circles. As we speak, there are solidarity circles in Europe to support Palestine, amplifying the voices of people living under the occupation there, becoming or trying to become ambassadors for change. The power of the collective is well documented, and I won't bore you with that here. You know it. But how can we build solidarity circles in our worlds, in our life, in this city? This city which doesn't even allow us to get home in good time, right? How do we begin to build solidarity circles here? Maybe start with our neighborhoods. Seek out like-minded people wherever they are. Seek out the activists. Reach out to people who are resisting, who could do with a little more of solidarity. Join groups and marches. Do we have differences? Yes, we might. Let's acknowledge these differences and rise above them to build solidarities, because that is what we need desperately today. I would suggest that we begin even with reading circles. Even that engagement is a start. If 30 people get into a room and read on propaganda and how to battle it best, and then go back and do what we can. Reading is becoming a rare skill, and I say this with great responsibility because I'm in classrooms for half of every year talking to 19, 20, 22-year-olds. And I recently met a bunch of 15-year-olds who had not read a single book of fiction, non-fiction, anything. I mean, 15-year-olds don't read non-fiction, but no fiction from cover to cover. And I asked them why. They said, why should I spend time reading the whole book? Yeah, I get a PDF, I get a summary, I have Perplexity. It just draws everything and gives me. And Google is now passé. There's Perplexity, which does so much more than Google. So why would a 15-year-old want to sit with a book? Well, for now, let's leave the 15-year-olds out. Can we, the 60-year-olds, sit in a room and perhaps read something together and do something about it? And so reading is a necessary skill, and I believe it's a necessary step in building solidarities also. Banu Mushtaq, you remember the name, who, when she won the International Booker Prize, said in her acceptance speech, and I quote, In a world that often tries to divide us, literature remains one of the last sacred spaces where we can live inside each other's minds, even if only for a few pages. Unquote. Perhaps we set up reading circles, they become solidarity circles, and then become active or activist on certain issues. Who knows, right? So, to reiterate, building solidarities would include the solidarity economy, solidarity with nature, and solidarity circles. I may sound like a dreamer, but I hope I'm not the only one. Okay? Of course. Let's begin by believing that building solidarities is possible, that battling propaganda is possible. It is a continuous, dynamic battle. It's not over when one election gets done. Because, as one of my most favorite writers and thinkers in this world, Susan Sontag, once argued, 10% of any population will be cruel no matter what. And 10% of any population will be merciful no matter what. And the remaining 80% can be swayed either way. Unquote. Okay. We, all of us here, those who have gathered in JB's memory, I reckon, are not the 80%. We are not the 80%. We are not the cruel ones either. We are the 10%, I should think, the engaged ones, the ones with voices and skills that we can use, must use, to move the needle away from propaganda and injustice, even if for a little bit. We should not play small, because our playing small does not serve the world. It does not serve us. Thank you. Thank you so much. I know this has been titled as a memorial lecture, and I might have sounded lecturish. I have many lecture friends, lecture giving friends, some of my dearest ones. And I've been giving lectures for a long time, but I really, and I told Dilip this when we spoke, that I don't want to end this like a lecture. It would be really nice if we could have a discussion, not question answers, because I'm not an expert. I'm a foot soldier in this battle, like all of you are. And so if we can have a discussion, and for me, the apogee moment of this evening will be if we can leave this room having formed one solidarity circle. I think JB would be happy with that.
My name is Sunil, and in the 35 minutes or so that you spoke non-stop, without a pause, it was wonderful to listen to you. At some stage, I asked myself, and maybe you might not agree with my question to myself, it was not a question to you, whether this presentation, which obviously came from the heart, was in a different way a kind of propaganda. That's the question that came to mind. And I don't have the answer.
To have someone speak so gently for such a long time and nothing about yourself and no, nothing, just calmly telling us what we are facing. What I'm left with is that are you still saying that there is hope for change? Are you saying that there is hope for change? Or are we going to get worse and worse and destroy ourselves and each other?
The demon or the Frankenstein, the monster is getting bigger doesn't mean we just sit quiet. That's what I'm saying. I'm not just saying hope for change. I'm saying we need to act to make the change happen.
Smruti, I can't thank you enough. You were brilliant. The clarity of thought you had were absolutely fantastic. My question to you is, when you're looking at the last 3 points you made, you used the word economy over and over again. And I think that word is so deeply connected to capitalism. When you look at all the literature on capitalism, it is always connected to that word economy. And I was just wondering if you could have altered that. Like, you talked about connection to nature, you talked about solidarity circles. I hope we are going to form one now. I hope everybody will agree. But that word economy constantly bothers me. If you could think of something else, or is it something that is the only word you can explain all these things about?
Well, the term solidarity economy is not mine. I borrowed it for this lecture. It exists, and that's how it is understood. You're right, in principle, to think of an alternative while using the terminology of what you are building the alternative against is it's a very confused state of affairs. But left to myself, maybe I would have coined another term. But the term solidarity economy is is gaining momentum around the world as solidarity economy. There are people who would understand some of those principles, where shareholders are replaced by stakeholders. Who are the stakeholders? So, well, yes, we could think of replacing that word, but the term solidarity economy is an accepted term.
Solidarity is a much larger phenomenon, and it's a much bigger aspiration. Solidarity economy is at the moment one form, and it is very structurally oriented, okay, about material realities of life. And so I think Anita's point is well made, that while that certainly has its place, I think in relation to propaganda, we are seeking here, and that's why, automatically you said, somebody said, can we have a solidarity circle come up here today? I think that is maybe currently the bigger urgent kind of, restlessness that we are all feeling. Yes. Because they are interrelated, yes, the economic reality and the way minds are being bent and the ways in which spirit is being undermined, but they are not synonymous. And I think it might be good to remember that and ask ourselves, why do our forms of solidarity actually, quite frankly, not have a matching level of passion? Let us be self-reflective about this. The forces of hate command and are able to incite and evoke an intensity of feeling that we simply don't demonstrate. So we need to seriously reflect on that.
Hi, Smruti. Firstly, thank you for putting it all so clearly and also pointing to the places where propaganda is being sold to us, but now we sort of don't see it anymore because it's become so everyday. But I don't have a question. I just want to say that we've become so cynical in the way that we speak, even on social media or amongst ourselves, that there's hope is sort of diminishing in its currency in a way. So thank you for bringing that back and leaving us with a hopeful thought that if we find a way to get a solidarity circle going or even started amongst our peers, then maybe we can get somewhere. If not now, then eventually. So thanks for that.
See, we have studied about propaganda in social psychology courses. Propaganda in that widest sense is a tool of modern society, mass-mediated society. And it is there in so many spheres. What you are specifically referring to is political propaganda with the backing of a very powerful political, a kind of a dictatorial kind of a regime. There is propaganda in advertisements, there is propaganda, election propaganda, which functions within the framework of democracy. And people generally know that this is propaganda, and it is okay. Everybody is free to propagandize. So, are you really saying no propaganda anywhere else, or are you are concentrating on a particular kind of very, very pernicious propaganda, but not propaganda per se, because that is a tool of modern communication. However problematic, it is available to everybody to do it. So, I thought I should. I would like you to make that difference.
Yes, I did confine myself to certain aspects, but of course, propaganda encompasses a much larger, wider, and it's often in the kind of economy, in the kind of society we are in, it seems pernicious, like you mentioned, it also seems inescapable and therefore normal. Okay? My point was very simply we need not allow it to become so normal that we need not allow our discourse, our public discourse, the popular imaginations, our narratives to be devoid of certain people, certain words, certain thoughts. What is really propaganda, whether it is political or otherwise, and propaganda, you're right, it's a tool of the modern capitalist free economy, democracy, right? Democracy that's built on this kind of a modern free economy. But the problem is not that propaganda exists. From what I see, the problem is that propaganda replaces verified information. Propaganda replaces truth. Propaganda begins to muddy and sully the truth. And propaganda, it's completely makes us incapable of critical thought. That is my point of argument. Not that I don't know what propaganda can be replaced with. That's for experts. But in recognizing this, can we bring back a little more criticality into the way we approach it? Otherwise, why would completely rational people who run businesses worth crores of rupees and are extremely level-headed and clear in their thinking bang thalis at their windows and sing "Go Corona Go"? It's, for me, that remains one of the lowest points where critical thinking died. As a nation, this is the result of a very specific kind of propaganda, where we were at that point 5 years ago faced with something we didn't completely know. We were fearful. Propaganda feeds on fear, you know that. And so what were we told to do? We were told to do this. And critical thinking never just entered at all. And so my point simply is, ideally in utopia, maybe there should be no propaganda at all. But so long as we have this kind of an economic system, I think you and I are on the same side. We agree that we can't escape it. It's going to be there. It's a part of that entire system. And that's why I talked about the economy as well. But at what point do we at least begin to reclaim critical thinking? How do we reclaim that? Like I said, it's probably taking a bucket to an ocean, but can 100 of us take 100 buckets, 200 buckets? That's the question I'm leaving with.
I think not only in this particular economic system, I think in all systems, propaganda exists. Wherever there is a particular group or party in power, it exists. And to my mind, every group in power will distort in order to serve its purpose, whatever that may be, depending on the various systems. I think the only way to combat this, which can then, propaganda can, after all, suppress and subdue in whatever way. The only way, I think, to combat it is when opinions can be freely expressed so that large numbers who may not buy that propaganda are able to express their opinions. When different perspectives can speak, for example, scientific perspective, critical thinking, when democracy, not just electoral democracy, but when democracy exists and is allowed to exist, at least is arrested by people for themselves, till then propaganda will continue and hold some sway, because it's easy. It's easy to believe than to question.
Yes.
It's so much easier.
Yes.
Plus, of course, there are suppressive and there are all kinds of ways to suppress. So,
All political systems use propaganda. And no, all systems do. All systems do. All systems do. True. In democracies, this is particularly dangerous because, for example, newspapers in Dubai and Abu Dhabi can have front page stories of the Sultan's pet horse who died. Why should Indian newspapers front page an elected prime minister petting his bird? Right? And so I think propaganda is also within a certain kind of a context. In totalitarian states, propaganda is, we know it exists. In dictators' countries, we know propaganda exists and that's how they function. This, all that I said, is in the context of a democracy. Propaganda erodes the best of democratic values, and that's why we have to fight against it.
As a fellow lecturer at
Ravi, please
SCM.
please don't throw legal arguments at me.
No, I can understand why our students at SCM are completely bowled over by your lectures. So, yes. So now, you know, about the subject of your talk. I see it differently, that you are placing a certain pejorative content in propaganda. Propaganda is really neutral. You have propaganda of the peasant. You have the propaganda of the insurgent. You have the propaganda of the rebel. You have the propaganda of the proletariat. So what you really want to have is a marketplace of ideas of competing propagandas. So because every political system, there's not really a distinction between a dictatorship and a democracy. The lines are all blurred.
Yes.
So the way I see it, particularly in our context, where the public space, where dominant media is completely controlled by the ruling regime, which is driving people like us to the margins, that you have to study history. You have to study particularly military history. And you understand the jurisprudence of the insurgent, whereby not only his military skills, but his ideology. How does a Nguyen Phan Giap, the great victor of the Vietnamese people against French colonialism, he's a student of Napoleon, of Jomini, Napoleon's great military general. And he deconstructs French military science to construct a war where his illiterate peasant and artisan and tribal can wield modern weapons and defeat one of the most important colonialists. So you have many such examples. You have, like Scott has written, Weapons of the Weak, as to how peasants would revolt against powerful regimes very often by fleeing. A peasant war was very often you simply picked up your family and you ran away. That was a war in itself.
Yeah.
You see in Gaza, tunnel warfare, whereby you do not come into conflict with the enemy. You create a different battlefield altogether. You see today drones, where small countries with drones can wipe out entire armies, and your entire mass tank warfare of yesteryears is now something of the textbooks.
Yeah.
So similarly for us, if you see the mobile phone, which today is the main all our anxieties, our hopes are centered on our mobile. You go anywhere in India, the mobile shop is ubiquitous. So here, what is the government doing all the time? Every time there's a problem, they'll cut off all media connectivity. But today you have Musk's Starlink system, where despite how much you may hate Musk, he has created technologies today which the state cannot control. So you have technologies today whereby tomorrow if the government says, okay, there are going to be no mobile phones operational and nobody can communicate, propaganda, counter-propaganda, everything is dead. You have a system like Starlink or something similar which will come out, whereby groups even like us can become broadcasters. So these are, sorry. So therefore what I'm saying is that in understanding propaganda, we have to think of counter propagandas and we have to think of what I call the jurisprudence of the insurgent. Thank you.
Good point. But I wouldn't trust Musk over any elected government. Yes.
Thanks, Smruti, for this very inspiring and also challenging, a talk that challenges all of us. Mine is not the question, but a kind of observation. What resonated very much with me is what you talked about, polycrisis. On which front do you fight and whom and how far? I mean, I have a classmate who dropped out of the WhatsApp group because, two of us said we stand in solidarity with Palestine. I have a cousin and all my cousins, many of them, who have become much more overtly religious, and they will not see beyond that. And because of that so-called, newfound, or it was already there, the enemy is so much more to be hated. And nothing positive that you say or you try to say, they will not see anything positive in the other. There's my mother's driver in Hyderabad, a Muslim driver, whose son was so hounded at school by other children, whose parents said, don't play with him. And the class teacher, a particular class, he had a mental breakdown. Now the fathers pulled him out of the school. The boy is 10. How does, which direction, what do you do? So often it's very disheartening. And my worry is, if you have a solidarity circle, are you in danger of being your own echo chamber? I know you mean, you don't stay within yourself, you see how you can reach outwards. But tough.
But the alternative is what? To feel helpless, dispirited, to be hyper-individualized, maybe right? This is one, like I said, I'm offering ideas. These are not the only ideas, of course.
Hello everyone, I'm Surabhi, Bain's granddaughter, and I'm here to thank Mr. Satish Sahani and the Nehru Center for this wonderful space. And to our guest of honor, Smruti Koppikar, thank you for your insight. I wish Bain were here to listen to you. And also my aunt and uncle, Meena and Shriram, who couldn't be here today, unfortunately. Thank you to our very special audience for being here. It means a lot to us. Have a lovely evening.